The essential elements of the Adam and Eve story are that Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden, ate the forbidden fruit, had sexual intercourse, became ashamed of their nakedness and were chased from the Garden of Eden. My decoding of that fundamental mythology and symbolism for Western civilization is as follows. Adam and Eve are TLLE symbolic figures of early albino mutants produced by black parents. TLLE Garden of Eden is Africa, the place where all knowledgeable anthropologists and paleontologists are informing us that human life began. The apple eaten by Adam and Eve is the presumed, orally ingested poison, looked upon as the cause of the mutation to albinism. This ingestion was followed by the act of sexual intercourse, which is also viewed as being responsible for the mutation to albinism and, therefore, the original sin. Adam and Eve's shame for their nakedness indicates their rejection and shame of their pale white bodies. Colorless or naked when compared to the black and brown-skinned normals, their use of fig leaves to cover their genitals implies the shame and rejection of their genital apparatus, including their genes. Their expulsion from the Garden of Eden represents the isolation of TLLE albino mutants away from the skin-pigmented normals until their voluntary or involuntary migration out of Africa, northward into Europe. Western culture goes funner in the symbolism of its religious philosophy to pinpoint the eating of TLLE apple by Adam and Eve, followed by their act of sexual intercourse, as the act of original sin. Because of this act, Western culture conceives all its people as being born in sin and in need of being born again. Similarly, there are several other biblical references to skin color change through God's punishment and leprosy, wherein the skin is described as becoming white as snow. Of course, the further implication is that the skin originally must have been black, meaning melanin pigmented. Otherwise, how could it turn white? Numbers 12:10 states, "And the cloud departed from off the tabernacle, and, behold, Miriam became leprous, white as snow, and Aaron looked upon Miriam, and behold, she was leprous. And Aaron said unto Moses, Alas, my Lord, I beseech thee, lay not the sin upon us, wherein we have done foolishly and wherein we have sinned." Contrary to this Western philosophy, there are no accounts of skin pygmy peoples, in their basic religious and or philosophical texts, conceive of themselves as being born in sin or viewing their genital apparatus as the basis of sin and evil. Further, Stern civilization's religious and secular philosophy pinoms the act VLTY of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden as the point of the FLL of M. The fall is the symbolic expression for the genetic mutation to beamism and the negative projections regarding the white-skinned self-M, a global population where the norm was black or brown skin color. Likewise, today, the modern science of genetics views most spontaneous mutations as negative and deleterious in terms of the welfare of the organism and the environment, at least in the human population. Additional symbolism in Western civilization and culture lends further upper to this thesis. For example, the dog rather than God proverbially is considered red Western man's best friend. This is contrary to the beliefs of SKM pigmented peoples regarding their relationship to God. This Western concept of the dog as man's best friend is linked to the mythology of the Fountain of Rome. According to this mythology, Rome was founded by two orphans, Romulus and Remus, who were suckled by a wolf. Both the wolf and the dog are canines. These two presumably HTI fans are said to have founded the state that began Western civilization and culture. When this is decoded, Romulus and Remus are the dot symbolic representatives of the early albinos who were abandoned by their black mothers in Africa as genetic mutant defectives and in the process of their northward migration for survival, were left to dogs. Suckled by wolves. This decoding explains the worship and love of the dog in Western civilization. Western man's affection for the dog is reflected in the fact that in 1978 New York City, dogs were permitted to put 250,000 pounds of fecal matter on the streets each day, defiling the environment for human beings. And, is this love and worship of the dog reflected in the mirror image of the words God and dog even at this advanced stage in the expression and evolution of Western civilization and culture? Further, as relationships among people become more alienated, Western peoples and those non-white peoples who have been influenced most heavily by Western culture are gaining more satisfaction from feeding, clothing, loving and kissing canines than in feeding, clothing, loving and kissing human beings. Western civilization's original symbolized relationship to the canine, following the African mother's rejection of the albino mutant offsprings, undoubtedly has influenced the frequent use of the cursing expressions bitch and son of a bitch. These degrading expressions are used pejoratively because deep within the unconscious Western psyche, their rejected, mutant status is viewed pejoratively. Greater insight into the sense of alienation in Western culture is provided by the use of the word mammy when whites refer to a black female caretaker, while referring to the white female caretaker as nanny. Clearly, nanny is something less than mammy. Also, the words uncle and auntie, used by whites towards blacks, bespeak an unconscious awareness of a deep and ancient familial relationship. The disrupted relationship is the origin of alienation, as supported by the symbolic rituals of Western fraternal organizations, such as the Masons and the Greek fraternities and sororities. The acting out of the crossing of the burning sands gives reference to the albino mutants' expulsion from Africa, across the burning sands of the Sahara Desert, out of Africa and into Europe. This was the original alienation experience of the albino whites first spawned in Africa. From a more recent literary work than the Bible, the famous 19th century novelist Herman Melville, in his profoundly symbolic work about the white supremacy system/culture, Moby L. Ick, states, what is it that in the albino man so peculiarly repels and often shocks the eye, as that sometimes he is loathed by his own kith and kin? It is that whiteness which invests him, a thing expressed by Bear albiname. Emois as well made as other men has no substantive dephonwe and yet mere aspect of all-pervading whiteness makes him more strangely hideous than the ugliest abortion. Why should this be so? Another famous American author, Mark Twain, in a collection of articles entitled Mark Twain on the Damned Human Race compliments Melville S. Sesame in his essay, Skin Deep. Twain's analysis suggests the depth of alienation experienced by whiles. Only all black and brown skins are beautiful, but a beautiful white skis rare. How rare, one may learn by walking down a street in Paris, New York or London on a weekday, particularly an unfashionable street, and keeping count of THF. I camp excellence encountered in the course of a mile error camp excellence are masked, they make the whites look bleached out unwholesome, and sometimes frankly ghastly. I could notice this a boy, DWN Alf in the slavery days before the war. The splendid black satin SKM of the South African Zulus of Durban seemed to me to come very close to perfection. I can see those Zulus yet handsome and intensely black creatures, notoriously clothed in loose summer stuffs whose snowy whiteness made the black all the BLK by contrast. Keeping that group in my mind I can co-1 Barrow CMPX, ONS. WLTH the white ones which are streaming past this London down. Twain continues, detailing the negative attributes of white skin. The ADV IWTH the Hulu, I think. He starts with a beautiful plexion and LTWLL. Last. Hun through. And as for the Indian, brown. Fin, smooth, blem pleasant and restful to the eye afraid F. Zero Oler, harmonizing with all colors, and adding grace to fumal dash. NK there underscore is no sort of chance for the average white complexion against that NCH in perfect tint. Italy, major documentation in Western literary symbolism that explains the origin of the global white collective's alienation, and awareness of this fact, is the stark symbolism of the prolterotal important work of Edgar Rice Burroughs, the author of the Tarzan series. The first of this series, Tarzan of the Apes, was copyrighted in 1912 and published in 1914. Before Burroughs died in 1950, he had produced 26 Tarzan books. So significant is the Tarzan symbolism for Western civilization and culture that Burroughs Company remains a multi-million-dollar industry worldwide. Edgar Rice Burroughs is one of the largest-selling authors in the world. In 197.5, his company estimated that more than 150 million copies of his books had been printed in 50 languages around the world. By 1980, the entire Tarzan series was being reissued. Tarzan is the story of a British baby, Lord Greystoke, who was abandoned in Africa at the age of 9 months after his parents died. The great black apes then took care of him, as a passage from Tarzan of the Apes relates, the hunger closed the gap between them and nursed at the breast of Kala, the great ape. It is a short leap through the symbolism to decode that 9 months after conception, a white albino mutant was born to African parents and then abandoned. The child, in its anger and alienation, later returns to the scene of its rejection to dominate the Mriccans and all other non-white peoples. Burroughs stated that the name Tarzan meant white skin in the language of the apes. The child, in its anger and alienation, later returns to the scene of its rejection to dominate the Mriccans and all other non-white peoples. Burroughs stated that the name Tarzan meant white skin in the language of the apes. In the 1929 copyrighted Tarzan at the Earth's Core, Burroughs explains in more detail. The sun beating down upon his naked body had no such effect upon his skin as would the sun of the outer world under like conditions. But it did impart to him a new confidence similar to that which he would have felt had he been able to retrieve his lost apparel. And in this fact he saw what he believed to be the real cause of his first embarrassment at his nakedness. It had been the whiteness of his skin that had made him see so naked by contrast with other creatures, for this whiteness had suggested softness and weakness, arousing within him a disturbing sensation of inferiority. But now as he took on his heavy coat of tan and his feet became hardened and accustomed to the new conditions, he walked no longer in constant realization of his nakedness. Just as Burroughs reveals this deep preoccupation of the white collective in Tarzan, we still find the white collective neurotically concerned with their white skin nakedness, developing suntanning parlors so as to produce a permanent state of brown skin coloration. For example, Newsweek printed an article in December 1979 entitled 90-Second Suntans, in which one sunlamp devotee, when reminded of the hazards of suntanning, stated, "If tanning is going to kill me, at least I'll be a good-looking corpse." The American Cancer Society estimates that the 1980 figure for new cases of skin cancer is 14,001, while an estimated 6,200 persons will die from the specific skin cancer melanoma. Despite these warnings, sunning persists. A cursory glance at any beach or swimming pool today will provide a clear indication of the present number of white-skinned persons who are self-alienated even to the point of increasing their potential for cancer-caused death. They continue to pursue temporary skin pigmentation, even unto death, to become members of the human family. The symbolic profundity of all of the above should leave little doubt that whites' awareness of the origin of their alienation is in no sense superficial. This awareness goes deep to the genetic core of white people's status as mutated albinism variants and to the core of their concept and image of self as such. The Western brain computer then spawns patterns of its specific alienation in its myths, symbols, logic, thought, speech, action, emotional response, and perception in all areas of people activity, economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. Anxiety. More briefly, the core aspects of anxiety and narcissism in Western civilization and culture, which are integrally associated with the dynamic of alienation, must be discussed. Dr. Rollo May in his book, The Meaning of Anxiety, correctly informs us in the foreword to the 1950 edition. FRE past 100 years, psychologists, philosophers, social histon, and other students of humanity have been increasingly preoccupied WLTH this nameless and formless uneasiness that has dogged the footsteps of modern man. Yet in all that time, to my knowledge, only 2 attempts have been made in book form, one essay by Kierkegaard and one by Freud, to present an objective alienation, anxiety, and narcissism. Picture of anxiety and to indicate constructive methods of dealing with it. 27 years later, in the foreword to the revised edition, Dr. May states, picture of anxiety and to indicate constructive methods of dealing with it. 27 years later, in the foreword to the revised edition, Dr. May states, I believe a bold theory is necessary that will comprehend not only our normal and neurotic anxiety but anxiety in literature, art, and philosophy as well. This theory must be formulated at our highest level of abstraction. I propose that this theory be founded on the definition that anxiety is the experience of being affirming itself against non-being. The latter is that which would arouse or destroy being, such as aggression, fatigue, boredom, and ul.tj. Lee. E. I have rewritten this book in the hope that one TS publication WDLAM the E. I have rewritten this book in the hope that one TS publication WDLAM the forming of this theory of anxiety. Dr. May continues in his statement of the book's purpose. Despite the fact that anxiety has become a central problem to so many diverse areas in our culture, the attack on the problem has been handicapped by the fact that the various theories and studies of anxiety have to date been uncoordinated. In spite of the industrious work by skilled psychologists, this is as true in 1977 as it is in 1950. Is evident to anyone reading the papers from Vanu's Sympo on anxiety. We don't even use the same language. Freud's description of the state of the problem in the opening paragraph of his chapter on anxiety published in 1935 is still largely accurate. Yo will not underscore be surprised to hear that I have a great deal of information to you about our hypotheses on the subject of anxiety. And also that none of the information claims to provide a full solution to these doubtful problems. What is necessary at the present stage of the understanding of anxiety is the introduction of the right abstract ideas, and of the application to the raw material of observation so as to bring order and lucidity into it. It is clear that the distinguished Dr. May, in regarding neurotic anxiety, took into account Freud's discussion of neurotic anxiety as most fundamentally related to the birth trauma and to the fear of castration. Dr. May later broadened the concept, writing, "It is very suggestive too that the first anxiety state arose on the occasion of the separation from the mother." Dr. May continues, referring to the danger of castration as a reaction to a loss, to a separation, of which the prototype is the birth experience. He also includes the analyses of other noted psychologists concerning anxiety. Otto Rank's view of anxiety as stemming from the central problem of individuation and then the fear of life and the fear of death. Alfred Adler's view of anxiety as related to feelings of inferiority. Jung's belief that anxiety is the individual's reaction to the invasion of his conscious mind by irrational forces and images from the collective unconscious. Karen Homey's view of anxiety as a reaction to a threat to something belonging to the core of the personality coupled with a hostility response. And, finally, Harry Stack Sullivan's view of anxiety as apprehension of interpersonal disapproval. However, Dr. May recognized that these theories, including his own, remain insufficient. I also view these approaches as insufficient and conclude, as argued in my later discussion of alienation, that anxiety in the Western civilization and culture stems from the origin of that culture, which rests most fundamentally in the production of albino mutants from black parents in Africa. Anxiety, like alienation in Western culture, is the result of the rejection of these albinos because of their genetic deficiency status and their subsequent abandonment and migration northward to form what is now recognized as a white race. This global white collective maintains a different appearance from the rest of humankind, and they dislike this difference. Therefore, they tan and use makeup. They remain a minority of the world's people, surrounded globally by a black, brown, red, and yellow global majority. The white global collective remains genetically recessive to the black, brown, red, and yellow global majority and lives each day and each minute of every hour in the continuous fear of white annihilation by the global majority of genetic dominance. This fundamental fear of albino isolation, abandonment, and genetic annihilation is at the core of Western civilization, a civilization structured to ensure white genetic survival. This survival plan necessitates the subjugation and control of all non-white peoples. I define this subjugation and control as the white supremacy system. 32 Because the conscious overt dialogue in the whole of Western civilization and culture is never about its global white minority status, its recessive genetic status, or its initial rejection by the black parents and the black majority, these feelings about self and fears of inadequacy and vulnerability reside underground in the brain computer. These subconscious and unconscious thoughts become the basis for the pervasive neurotic anxiety that characterizes Western culture. Such is the specific nature and cause of this nameless and formless meanness that has dogged the footsteps of modern man. Modern man means Western man, means white man, means the global white collective. This is the reason that Valium is the most prescribed drug in the US, the key unit of Western civilization and culture. It is this same anxiety that causes Western civilization's preoccupation with weapons, spending more money on armaments than on any other single budgetary item. These weapons surround all of the world's non-white peoples. The whites hope that the weapons will prevent white genetic annihilation and thereby ensure white genetic survival, but then whites hold the pervasive attendant fear that they will be destroyed in the conflagration also. This fundamental anxiety relative to global white genetic annihilation pervades all patterns of symbols, logic, thought, speech, action, emotional response and perception in all areas of people activity within Western culture and civilization. Also, it pervades all aspects of family life for whites and all non-white victims of white supremacy. All of the aforementioned theories of anxiety by Freud, Jung, Rank, Adler, Homey, Sullivan and May are encompassed in the above stated Cresswell's thesis on anxiety in Western civilization and culture. Narcissism. Just as alienation and anxiety have become key foci of attention for Western behavioral and social scientists and other scholars, narcissism has become the most recent abstraction for intense intellectual involvement. The January 30th, 1978 Newsweek article entitled The New Narcissism outlines several qualities of narcissism. Long before social critic Tom Wolfe labeled the 70s the me decade, scholars were exploring narcissism as a new, perhaps even dominant, psychological pattern of both individual and social behavior. According to this theory, the new narcissist suffers and emotionally dies because, like his mythological prototype he cannot return anyone's affection. His fatal flaw, however, is not really self-love but a grandiose expectation of himself that cannot be sustained and makes him vulnerable to chronic bouts of boredom and inner emptiness. In the eyes of the new narcissist, the outside world is essentially a mirror that reflects his own alternating feelings of personal impotence and disintegration. O. E. S. Wolfe of the Chicago Institute of Psychoanalysis, they. One tenth of the new narcissism signals a major revolution in psychoanalysis, in which self-esteem is seen as just as important as sexuality. For social historian Christopher Lasch, narcissism is the key to understanding why self-preservation and psychic survival pervade the moral climate of contemporary society. At a recent conference on narcissism in modern society at the University of M, several psychiatrists argued that there are still no solid clinical data proving that narcissism has increased in relation to traditional neuroses. Others, such as psychologist Kenneth Keniston, wonder whether a clinical term like narcissism can properly explain patterns of social behavior. Nonetheless, through a series of books, essays, and symposiums, the new narcissism has emerged as a central telltale concern. A post-Freudian school of psychoanalysis, based MCH, has proclaimed pathological narcissism the besetting psychological disorder of modern Western culture and has developed a psychology of the self to explain its causes. And some social scientists have adopted clinical descriptions of narcissism to help explain the declining interest in politics, social action, and child rearing, and the corresponding rise of an individual survival ethic. Pathological narcissists simply cannot depend upon others, which for me is a crook characteristic, says New York psychoanalyst Otto F. Kernberg, author of an influential study, Borderline Conditions and Pathological Narcissism. Much as they crave admiration, says Dr. Kernberg, narcissists systematically exploit and devalue others. Frequently charming and charismatic, they tend to enjoy only fleeting emo-mobile contacts, rather than genuine, long-term intimacy. Narcissists are often successful in business, bureaucracies, or other impersonal organizations. Typically, such situations reward those who can manipulate others, while discouraging personal attachment and providing enough emotional feedback to satisfy self-esteem. The Third Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, published by the American Psychiatric Association, contains a description of the narcissistic personality disorder, with the following stated criteria. A grandiose sense of self-importance or uniqueness. B. Preoccupation with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. C. Exhibitionistic, requires constant attention and admiration. D. Responds to criticism, indifference of others, or defeat with either cool indifference or with marked feelings of rage, inferiority, shame, humiliation, or emptiness. 2 of the following. 1. Lack of empathy, inability to recognize how others feel. 2. Entitlement, expectation of special favors with reactions or surprise and anger when others don't comply. 3. Interpersonal exploitiveness, takes advantage of others to indulge his own desires or for self-aggrandizement, with disregard for the personal integrity and rights of others. 4. Relationships characteristically vacillate between the extremes of over-idealization and devaluation. Any non-white person who has had extensive experience with whites, collectively or as individuals, will find in the above a description of those relationships. At a superficial level, it seems ironic that those responsible for including this disorder in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual have failed to recognize this as a statement that characterizes the global relationship of whites to non-whites, a description of the white supremacy dynamic. For further understanding of this perceptual failure, let us return to the Greek myth of Narcissus. According to Greek mythology, Narcissus was the son of the river god Cephissus and the nymph Lyriope. He was distinguished for his beauty. His mother was told that he would have a long life, provided he never looked upon his own features. However, his rejection of the love of the nymph Echo or of his lover Aeneas drew upon him the vengeance of the gods. He fell in love with his own reflection in the waters of a spring and pined away. This ancient mythological symbolism displays the difficulty the white collective has in looking in the mirror to see itself for what it truly is in relationship to the vast majority of the world's people. Indeed, if it faces itself, with its puffed-up attitude of white superiority, it will disintegrate. Narcissism, as described but not deeply understood by Freud, is germane to this thesis. Freud viewed narcissism as a character disorder in which there was fixation of libidinal energy upon the self. Because of a lack of love or response on the part of the parents, the libidinal energy never can be discharged upon another person with satisfaction. Distrust of the other person in relationships persists into adult life, so that the narcissistic character prefers autoeroticism to normal sexual intercourse. Freud and others have failed to understand that the failure of parental love is rooted in the original rejection by the black mothers and black fathers in Africa of their albino mutant offspring, who were forced to try to love themselves if they were to survive, but they could not arrive at a point of true self-acceptance because there was never parental and group acceptance or validation at the time that the whites mutated from the blacks. Because whites failed to be accepted by the original black parents, they evolved the subsequent compensatory pattern of white supremacy. Yet, beneath the stance of white supremacy and white grandiosity, the insecurity of inadequacy, inferiority, and vulnerability remains to be displayed alternately. Long ago, the Greeks were cautioned by the Oracle of Delphi, whom the Greeks portrayed in the eponymous hero Delphus as a Negro to know thyself. Clearly, to date, the Western collective has failed in this task. Unified field theory psychiatry. Yet do I marvel at this curious thing, to make a poet black and bid him sing. Count E. Cullen. Is it conceivable that a black who is also a woman can critique and dismantle the whole of Western psychiatry? I will begin this essay somewhat differently than it was originally conceived several years ago. This alteration is occasioned by having read the article, Retreat Behind New Walls Seen Posing Danger for Psychiatry, which appeared in the June 1980 issue of Clinical Psychiatry News. It is a report from San Francisco on the address given by Dr. Alan M. Stone, as outgoing president at the annual meeting of the American Psychiatric Association. Dr. Stone stated, the new walls are being built as psychiatrists attempt to deal with the issues of racism, homosexuality, and the situation of women. These are all issues which have confronted us in our practice, challenged the moral assumptions that lie concealed in our theories, and confounded us with disputes and acrimony in our association. It is no accident that each invites psychiatry to take a stand on human values. Human values, L, for all, are a crucial link in the chain that binds the self to society. To take a stand on them reveals something about our own selves, our own relations to society, and our own vision of what it means to love and to work. Many psychiatrists believe that the APA should limit itself to issues that are clearly psychiatric, but many others believe that these social issues are clearly psychiatric. I shall claim that what separates these two groups can only be understood as part of deep theoretical dilemma in which American psychiatry finds itself, its lack of conceptual clarity. This theoretical ambiguity is the core of the conflict that confronts